Now we're going to watch your son's functional reading assessment. What this is we asked your son to read a grade appropriate, age appropriate passage, and he was wearing a pair of infrared goggles while he read the passage. And what the goggles do is they track his eye movements as he reads. What we want to see in a reader is that your eyes pause about every 7 to 9 letters as you move through the passage, and we want to see that when you go from the end of one line, you go directly to the beginning of the next line. You don't typically land on the very first letter. Most readers are going to land about 3 letters in, but I look for that consistency, so each time you land on the next line that you're landing in the same place, not jumping and skipping and inconsistent with those movements. The younger reader is expected to have more pauses and more of what we call regressions, where your eyes move backwards. The first grade reader is going to decode letter by letter and then go back and read the word and move forward from there. So the younger the reader, the more okay it is to have additional pauses and regressions. The older the reader, the fewer pauses and regressions we should have. So again, your son was reading a 10th grade passage. The red line is showing us where his eyes paused. So that was a great saccade, is that movement where you land in the beginning of the line. That one we see he landed towards the end of the line and had to jump backwards. We saw a little bit of back and forth. That back and forth is really going to interfere with comprehension. When you're reading a word out of order in the sentence or perceiving letters in a word out of order, you're having to work much harder to figure out what the passage is saying. So there's a little bit of, again, back and forth and a little bit of inconsistency. So this is showing me that his eyes are having to work much harder than that they should to go through the passage. Now what's impressive is your son still had a 100% comprehension on this passage, which was excellent. This is a 10-line passage. We're going to tend to see the longer the passage is, the more we're going to see that comprehension go down as the child's brain is really fatiguing. So overall, next what's going to happen is the computer measures a bunch of the data. So what we're seeing is the black line is where we would like the data to be ideally. The red line is showing where your son was testing. So when we look at the number of times your son was pausing, grade appropriate for him would have been 77 pauses in this passage. Your son had 132 pauses with the left eye and 138 pauses with the right eye. So that reading is more fragmented than what we would like to see. And we're seeing that left and right eye aren't always moving together at the same time. There's no amount of attention or concentration and focus that can change that. That tells me that we're struggling with that coordination, that synchronization between left and right brain. I'm also seeing the number of times the eyes go backwards. We do a regression at the end of each line. Those are expected. These are the regressions above and beyond the backward movement just for moving to the next line. So again, I'm seeing a difference between left and right, and there's more back and forth than what there should be. So those are kind of some of the key things. Overall, the reading rate for grade appropriate for your son is 340 words per minute, and so your son is testing at 187 words per minute. So it's taking him longer to get through the passage, and some of that is going to be because when he pauses, those pauses are a little bit longer than what they should be. So I know you mentioned that your son is okay with reading. He doesn't love it. It's not something that he's going to choose to do on his own. For him, it's just going to take him a little more energy and effort to get through the passage because brain is having to work a little bit harder, so we're going to see a higher level of fatigue with that. The last thing that we're going to look at is a graph. This graph is showing me the movement of how left eye is moving versus right eye. We want to see the graphs moving exactly the same so that they're moving together. And overall, we can see there's a couple places where the movement coming from this eye is larger than the movement coming from right eye. But overall, this part looks pretty good. Really, I'm less concerned with the eye teaming. Certainly that can improve a little bit. I'm more concerned with the length of the pauses and smoothing out those eye movements so they're more consistent. And that's exactly what we're going to do through program is work to mature those eye pieces. And the great part of that is that's going to significantly improve his attention and focus, because right now he's functioning with a brain that's having to work harder to get through the same passage than his peers. Any questions at all with that? Okay, the last thing I want to point out is Again, we had your son reading a 10th grade passage. The computer put his grade level equivalency at a 5th grade 6 month. That doesn't mean he should be reading 5th grade curriculum. What it tells me is he has the number of eye movements that I would expect from a reader that's about 10 years of age. So testing about 5 years behind in the mechanics of those eye pieces, which again is going to fatigue the brain, it's going to hurt comprehension, and is also going to interfere with attention and focus because you're working harder than what he should.